It was a quiet, chilly night, and I was walking to my friend's house. We had an important topic to discuss, something that couldn't be done over a video call. I needed his help with some notes for an upcoming exam. The road was empty, wrapped in an eerie silence. The tall trees lining the streets swayed gently in the cold breeze, their shadows stretching across the dimly lit path. On the other side, dense bushes seemed to rustle faintly, though there was no one around. As I walked, I suddenly heard a voice behind me, soft but distinct. "Excuse me, hello." I froze for a moment, then shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But then, barely a few seconds later, I heard something that sent a chill down my spine. "Joshua!" Someone had just called my name. I stopped dead in my tracks and turned around. Scanning the empty road behind me, there was no one there. My heart began to race, and uneasiness crept in. I tried to shake off the fear and continued walking, but after only a few steps, I saw her. A young girl standing directly in my path. Her hair was messy, and she looked disheveled. She spoke softly, almost pleadingly. "Please help me." At first, I hesitated. What was a girl doing out here all alone at this time of night? My mind immediately jumped to the ghost stories I'd heard about spirits on lonely roads. Sensing my hesitation, she tilted her head slightly and asked, "What are you thinking?" I mustered up the courage to respond. How can I help you?" She gestured to her leg, which appeared injured, and lifted her hand to show blood dripping from a wound. "I fell from that tree," she said, pointing to a large oak nearby. Relief washed over me. She wasn't a ghost. She was just a normal girl who needed help. "Where do you live?" I asked. She looked at me and replied, "I'm Isabella, David's daughter. You know David, right? He owns the bakery near your house." I nodded. I knew the bakery well. It was just a few blocks from my own home. "All right," I said. "I'll walk you home." "But what were you doing out here so late?" As we walked, she explained she had been on her way back from school when a group of men approached her. They told her that her dad had sent them to pick her up. Trusting them, she got into their car, but it soon became clear they weren't friends. They were enemies of her father. "They tied me up," she said, her voice trembling. "I managed to escape and hid here, hoping someone would pass by." Her story was chilling, but she seemed relieved now that she was safe. Eventually, we reached her house. It was a small, cozy-looking home with warm lights glowing from the windows. "This is my house," she said with a weak smile. "Thank you for helping me. Good night." I watched her walk inside before heading back to my friend's house, still trying to process everything she had told me. A few days later, I stopped by David's bakery to pick up some breakfast. While waiting for my order, I remembered Isabella and decided to ask about her. "Mr. David?" I began. "I met your daughter Isabella. The other night, she said she was hurt, so I helped her get home. Is she all right now?" The look on David's face is something I will never forget. His cheerful demeanor faded, replaced by a look of confusion and disbelief. "Son?" he said slowly. "How do you know Isabella?" I told you," I said, now feeling a little uneasy. "She told me she's your daughter. She said she fell and needed help." David's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Isabella died 5 years ago." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. He went on to explain that Isabella had been abducted years ago by men who held a grudge against him. During a rescue attempt, a stray bullet struck her, and she didn't survive. I stood there in silence, my mind reeling. "That's impossible," I stammered. "I saw her. I spoke to her." David shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears. "Son, if you saw her, it wasn't her. You saw her spirit." The room spun, and a wave of cold dread washed over me. I didn't even realize I was falling until everything went black. I've always been an independent person, never relying on anyone but myself. I had been working at the same office for 3 years, but after a while I felt like I needed something more. Maybe a better salary, a higher position. So I decided to send my resume out to other companies. It didn't take long before I got a response. One of the offices invited me for an interview. I showed up, hoping this could be the freshest start I was looking for. But when I got there, they told me I had to go through a 5-day training before I could even be considered for the job. I thought, alright, no big deal. I'm good at what I do. I can handle this. The office was in a 3-story building and I worked on the first floor. The upper floors were used for other offices. The training went well for the first few days and everything felt normal. But then, on the 5th day, things started to take a turn. My boss gave me a difficult task to complete by the end of the day. I was already tired, but I didn't want to leave unfinished work. So I told my boss, I'll finish it today. Please give me some extra time. Do you want to work overtime? He asked. Yes, I said. I'll get it done today. He hesitated for a moment, then said, Alright, but remember, no one stays here too long after hours. I was too focused on the task to think much of it. I reassured him, I'm fine. People work late on the upper floors. I'll be fine. He shrugged and said, Just know that if you need anything, there's a watchman on the ground floor. Let him know. The office grew quieter as everyone left, and I stayed behind focusing on my work. Hours went by, and before I knew it, I was starting to feel drowsy. I didn't want to fall asleep if I didn't finish the task. It would reflect poorly on me, so I decided to take a break and grab some coffee to wake myself up. As I walked through the quiet, empty hallways, something strange happened. I heard a faint noise, a soft mewing. I turned around and saw a black cat sitting at the end of the corridor, staring at me. I thought it might be hungry, so I decided to give it some biscuits. I picked it up and brought it to my office. I thought it was a nice gesture, but looking back, I now realized that this was probably where things started to go wrong. I set the cat down on my desk, offering it the biscuits, but the cat didn't eat. It just stared at me with wide, glowing eyes, its mouth open, and it mewed loudly. It wasn't acting like a normal cat. At first, I thought maybe it was hurt, but there were no signs of injuries. So why was it behaving like this? After a while, the cat went quiet and I thought everything was fine. But then something strange happened. When I looked at the cat again, it had this weird, unsettling grin on its face. It didn't look like a normal smile. I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, I looked down at my laptop screen, and what I saw wasn't a work. It was a strange image of a witch. My heart skipped a beat. I closed my eyes, trying to shake the feeling of dread that was creeping over me. When I opened my eyes again, there was something standing right next to me, too close. A hand touched my shoulder. I spun around in shock, but there was no one there. That's when I saw her. The witch. From the image, she was standing right in front of me, holding a knife, ready to strike. I couldn't breathe. My body froze in fear, but instinct kicked in and I ran. I bolted for the stairs, but just as I reached them, someone shoved me from behind. I tumbled down the stairs, pain shooting through my body. I screamed out, hoping someone would hear me. The watchman who was on the ground floor heard my cry and rushed up. Madam, what happened? He asked, his voice full of concern. I could barely speak. I was bleeding, too terrified to say a word. The watchman helped me to my feet and led me to the lobby. Madam, he said, his voice quiet. You shouldn't have stayed here so late, this building. It used to be a graveyard many years ago. No one works here at night anymore. People say strange things happen when you're alone here after dark. I shuddered, the horror of what I had just experienced sinking in. From that day on, I never stayed late at the office. I always made sure to leave as soon as my shift was over. No matter how much work I had left, no one could make me stay after that night. And I've never looked at the building the same way again.